Hi, this is the module Correlation within DataMiner sysadmin. Since it's the last module within sysadmin, let's have a quick look at our journey so far. So within sysadmin, we started off with the system center, managing our DataMiner agents, upgrading and all the things around that. So we had a whole series of pages we discovered there. And then we went into scripting connectors, adding some quick data sources to grab some data somewhere into the DataMiner system. And the Automation Pro brought our automation scripts to the next level, you could say. And now we have our final module we need to discover here, correlation. Note there are still lots of other things we can discover in the DataMiner system, but here within our journey, the correlation is the last module to cover. So this is the module Correlation within DataMiner sysadmin. And in correlation, we are able to detect certain conditions, certain events, and react on that automatically. Reacting could be warning the operator, grouping alarms, making it more understandable, or maybe even making actions to potentially correct the problem by going to, for instance, a backup path. So that's the correlation, and on the menu we will first discover the correlation app within DataMiner Cube and then jump into creating a correlation rule and making some demos and trying to play around with all the different features we have in the correlation rules. And we'll also take a look at the correlation alarms. We basically will use them in our demos as well. And finally, there's also an exercise you can play with. All right, so the correlation app is the app we want to use to build our correlation rules. So within the apps section of your cube, you will find the correlation app, and it shows you on the left-hand side all the correlation rules, and on the right-hand side the details of the selected correlation rule. So basically the correlation app allows you to define all the rules and all the knowledge you add into that correlation engine so that DataMiner is able to detect the correct environments or situations and events and automatically trigger on that to do certain things so that we can reduce the time to decision to automatically, for instance, go to a backup device or immediately warn an operator that this is happening in the system, or making it more user-friendly by grouping alarms. So we can trigger certain things like automated actions like sending an email, grouping alarms together, or just fully executing an automation script to reroute the whole signal flow to some backup paths. So it can vary with your conditions there. So we'll do that in our correlation app. So it's working a little bit like, you could say, the automation module. So we have that folder structure. So you can add new folders in there. In a folder, you can add a rule. You can delete. So you can also use the right-click menu. You can also drag and move them around so to reorganize them. So I think we know these kind of things already. We have played with it also in the automation module. So we'll create there a correlation rule and then start building that correlation rule and play around with that in just a minute. All right, so creating that correlation rule. Let's take a look at that. So here is, in essence, the full building of a correlation rule. There are 8 steps. They are maybe a little bit vague now, so we'll take them step by step, one at a time. We will explain them in more detail. So the first thing we will do is add a new correlation rule, and let's maybe just do that already in the UI and take a look at that. So let's jump onto our DataMiner system. So you can use your own DataMiner system or use a DAS. I'll be using the training platform within Skyline Academy that is provided there, because there we have some Philips devices we have been playing with previously. So I have 3 London IRDs here where I can play with the audio output level and the left and right test level to generate a little bit of alarms and see how that works. So that's why I'm using this platform. So let's go to the apps, and then we go into the correlation app there, and you can see on the left hand side the existing the existing rules that are available, and you can create folders. So we have a trainer folder there, and within that folder, for instance, let's put it in the trainer folder, we'll create a brand new rule by right-clicking and saying add rule, or you can use the button at the bottom as well. So first things first is let's give it a more meaningful well, I'm not sure if it's more meaningful, but I'm going to call it training Bert. My first name is in there. So that's the first thing I did. I created a brand new correlation rule and I entered a name. All right, so far so good. Now, below that name, there is a whole series of configuration you can do. It's important to note that you don't need to do everything. So we will start with the very basic form and then further build up on that. And the very basic first thing we will do is going to contain an alarm filter. Because that's typically what we will do. The correlation engine is getting all the alarms in. And basically what you need to do is you need to say like, well, if this and this and this is happening in the system, then you need to react on it. So we do that with alarm filters. So, and this is very similar as we have seen already the alarm filters in our alarm console or in trap forwarding, for instance, those or notification emails. So we saw those filters already. So it's a little bit similar here, although it's not using those filters. So we can basically say if element is X and if severity is critical, for instance, we want to do certain things. I'll immediately create an example on that or further modify my example that I already started. So typically that's the thing we will always add. Then we have more, you could say, optional things. We can do optionally some alarm grouping. That's something we will then add optionally. We can add some rule conditions. That's something we will optionally add as well then later on. And we can also define a trigger mechanism. What is that? That is, we can immediately react on something if we detect it, or we can put a slight delay or a long delay in there and say, if this happens, if this is happening in my system for 30 minutes, then do something. Or if it's happening very frequently or in a short period of time, we can also trigger on that. That's a little bit the mechanism. We can play around with that as well. The default is immediate. That's what we will go for in the first instance. So I basically will skip first in my first demos all of these in-between actions, you could say, and I will only define a filter and only add an action at the bottom. And we'll talk about actions then later on. The initial action that I will do is generate an alarm, because then I can immediately see the correlated alarm in my DataMiner Cube system, and I can immediately see when it's triggering, when it's not triggering, and play around with that. So that's why I will immediately add an easy action there, generate alarm. So I will configure that in just a minute when we go through the alarm filters. But one important step there is step 8. And that is something you cannot forget, is to enable the rule. By default, if you create a new correlation rule, let's check it out. My correlation rule is not enabled, so you can see the enable is not activated. That's why it's also still a little bit in a gray font and not in a black font like the rain fade. So this one is still, I just added it. I still need to configure it, so it's not going to start triggering on any alarm now, because I didn't specify any filtering yet. So no, it's not doing anything. Unless you fully configured it and you're happy with your configuration, then you enable it, and then it will start triggering on your system and all the alarms that are happening. So don't forget about that enable rule. So we will take all the steps here, but we will start with the very simple one, and that is just adding an alarm filter. That's the most basic thing that we will do. That's the first step. And basically all the alarms, this is a little bit visualized here, all the alarms are coming in. Some are critical, major, minor, whatever, clears. They are coming in, and we are doing some filtering. For instance, in this case, only the criticals are being taken into account, and we'll immediately do an action on that so that we can really play with it. In this case, it's filtering on a protocol, but let's first now do an example, and we will just filter on our first London IRD. I will say, if an alarm happens on my London IRD, do something. It could not be more simple than just saying here, filter if element equal to, and I select the London IRD 1 that I have also here in my surveyor. Okay, is element equal to London IRD 1. So if an alarm happens on London IRD, do something. And what will I do? Well, I will scroll down, because I will skip everything in between there with grouping and conditions and sliding window and actions and all of, oh yeah, actions. I need actions. I want to do an action. So that's only one action that I will add for now, and that is new alarm. So I add an action, new alarm. I don't need to worry too much about all the options. I will come back to that later on when talking about the actions. I will just say generate a new alarm, and everything is already populated. It will use the base element, the base parameter, value. I still need to specify a value, and let's just say grouping alarm. I'll just a very generic grouping alarm that I will do with the base severity. So now everything is not in red anymore, so I can effectively apply this. So it can specify a unique name. Oh, training BERT already exists. Training BERT 2 then. Apply. Training BERT 2. Okay, so I do have here my correlation rule created. I gave it a name. I said if something is happening on the London IRD 1, then generate a new alarm. Okay, let's see if that works. Note I have added an alarm console here. Oh, let me do it again. I'll take the view, correlation view here, drop it in there, and it's going to show me active alarms. Okay, so it's only going to show me active alarms of that correlation view. So let's generate an alarm. Okay, you can see there's an active alarm, and okay, nothing happens. Why is nothing happening? Well, I didn't activate my correlation rule. I said, don't forget about enabling this correlation rule. So I fully configured. It's not because you apply it, you save it. You basically apply it, you save it, but you didn't enable the rule yet. So make sure you enable the rule, and now you click apply again to save it. And now you can see it's bold, and immediately it kicks in. You can see now we have a grouping alarm that was happening there on that London audio output level, and it's now, well, grouping is a big word because there is only one alarm, but something happened on that element and it reacted on it. What will happen now? Why is it a grouping alarm, or why do I call it a grouping alarm? Well, if I generate some more alarms, you will notice at my alarm console that all of the alarms are going inside that grouping alarm. So I have one alarm that consolidates everything that happens in that correlation rule. So by default, when you filter on certain things and you generate an alarm, everything that happens that matches the filter goes inside that grouped alarm. So that also means if I would, let's say, generate a correlation action like making a script happen or something like that, it would only trigger once when it first matches and it first generated like the alarm, you could say. Okay, that's all fine for now. But in my slides, it was doing that on protocol. Well, what's the reason? Well, it's nice if it's grouping everything from the London IRD together, because then I can nicely have a grouped alarm there, because they are related, those things together. But I have actually 3 of the London IRDs. So do I need to now create 3 times a correlation rule? that is a possibility. You can duplicate that correlation rule and say if element is London IRD 1 and 2 and 3 and do it 3 times, but you have to maintain 3 rules then. So therefore, it might be interesting to have a more generic rule because maybe tomorrow there will be a fourth IRD and things like that. So therefore, I will change my correlation rule so that it's a little bit wider. And as it was mentioned in the slides, I will actually do it on protocol and say if it's equal to the these elements are using the Philips DVS 3810 production version. Always use production version. So if they are, if the protocol matches this production version, I will add one more filter because we have lots of these test devices elements on there. I will limit the things down to the view and only do it within our correlation view. Otherwise, there will be some more clutter there. No, not this view, but the for view. And if the view is equal to London. Well, I forgot to... No, I didn't forget. Okay, so now I will say if the protocol is the Philips and it's in my correlation view here, it will trigger also on the other IRDs 2 and 3. So let's apply that one. So I save my correlation rule, open up the London IRD2, and let's try it out. And let's put this one also into alarm. What is happening? It goes into alarm. I don't see any new alarms. What happened? It actually also added this London IRD in the same bucket because it's still the same correlation rule that is also taking into account those additional alarms. So if London IRD 3 also goes into alarm, it all arrives into one big bucket. So London IRD 1, 2, 3, which could be a valid use case. Because maybe you have a certain remote site, there are multiple IRDs in there, and if they all go into alarm, you want them to be consolidated because maybe there's a rain fade happening there. Well, indeed, this is almost that rule, but I will need some other conditions there, and I'll come back to that when we get to the rule conditions. But I'm getting close to that one. I still need to define that actually all of them go into alarm. But I didn't do that yet because only 1 or 2 was already grouped that together. Okay, so now I have created my filtering. I first filtered on one specific element and I said within that element, if these things are happening, some critical alarms are happening and maybe the LMB1 supply and the audio output level go into alarm, I want to do something. It was a very basic one. I just said whenever something happens on the element on that specific IRD1, do something. Now I want to make it a little bit more generic by going to protocol and taking that view into account, which could be a rain fade, but I actually want to take the next step by also grouping into buckets. So that's the next item. Next to the filtering, I can do grouping and I can group them into certain buckets, you could say. So that's the next item I can do underneath the alarm filter. So I set everything happening on Philips devices in my correlation view, but I want to add some grouping and watch out what it will happen in my alarm console as I go for group by these elements by element. And if I now click apply, I have 3 groups. So it's grouping them by elements. And now I have nicely grouped everything together. If I would add a London IRD 4 in there and generate some alarms on there, it would also nicely group on there. So all the 1 alarms are in there and all the 2 and all the 3 alarms are in there. So if I would remove an alarm again, now it's gone, the 3, and then I can generate again an alarm on there and put some additional alarms in there, for instance. So the bucket will fill in for the IRD3. The bucket is filling up there with more alarms. So that's perfect. That's how I can make a rule a little bit more generic, you could say. So in the first instance, I let me go back to my correlation rule. In the first instance, I made my alarm filter very specific for one element for one condition, which was okay to do it on one IRD and was working fine. But then if I want to do it for any IRD, I need to basically make it wider, but I then need to make use of that grouping by element. Otherwise, I have a very wide, big group or buckets of alarms. Okay, so that's the grouping, and you can group, as you can see, by a whole bunch of other things as well. For instance, by view could also be an interesting one. Okay, I filtered, I grouped. Next step is a condition, because maybe in my system, I only want to group if not just in any condition, but I only want to group if the LMB1 supply is also into the buckets. And that's why I can add some additional rule conditions. So I take in all the alarms and I take in, I group them by elements. So I put them into buckets. Let's scroll a little bit down. And then I have this rule condition I can add. And there are two rule conditions. I'll show both of them. So the first one is a filter condition. Again, same thing as a filter. And I can say, well, I want to have in there a parameter description by protocol. And then I need to select that Philips protocol. Doesn't want to. Philips, yes, there it is, Philips production. So I go for my Philips, and then I say that, for instance, audio output level, I already have lots of audio output levels. I will only do the grouping when the LMB1 supply is an alarm. So if the LMB1 supply is in that bucket, then it must execute the grouping. So if I now apply this, what will happen? Because the LMB1 supply is not an alarm on any of those. It's just audio output level and left test level and right test level. So if I apply it, all the grouping is gone. And we don't do any grouping. It's just a regular system now. The IRDs can go into alarm and they generate lots of alarms. So I have regular things. But I wanted it to make it a little bit easier for the operator if a whole bunch of things are going into alarm, like on this one. I already have 3 alarms on IRD 1. And I also noticed that the LMB1 supply is off. Then you can see it groups things together. Because it's logical if, for instance, the input is going into alarm, yeah, it's logical that all the other stuff is going into alarm as well. Remember this use case, you can fix that by using conditional alarming. An alarm template, make the alarm template conditional and say if the input is no longer valid, then all the other things are not going into alarm by removing the alarm template or the alarm thresholds, conditional alarming. You can also use correlation and use grouping and say if the input goes down, group everything on that IRD together, because then the operator will see, oh, the LMB1 supply, oh yeah, the LMB1 supply is down, so the input is down, for instance. Yeah, all the other stuff goes into alarm as well. I don't need to worry about all the other stuff underneath there. Those are like consequence alarms because of my LMB1 supply going down. So that's like a use case you can do with the additional condition. So you take in all the alarms of the IRDs, you group them into buckets per element, and if one bucket of an element also contains an LMB1 supply, then you group them and then you trigger on that. So that's the filter condition I added in this example. Let me remove again that filter condition and apply it so that we have again 3 buckets which are immediately triggering, and they are always immediately generating that alarm. There's another one I can do, and that's based on a script condition. So instead of a filter condition, a script condition. And I'm going to show you one example. If you want to have more, you can actually just easily search on script conditions. Examples of script conditions you have here. There are certain things you can do. You have some examples here and some more information in the other help pages. I'm not going to go through all of it. You could, for instance, say if for my remote site I have an average receive level, you take the average of the value of the receive levels. If I have really a bad receive level there on all of these receivers, the average is bad, then I want to do something and group, for instance. That's already a little bit more complicated. I'll go for something like this. Count star is greater or smaller than a certain value. That's basically if my bucket contains too many alarms or a certain amount of alarms, then I start grouping it. That's what I will do in this situation here. So I will say if my bucket, let's say, for instance, this one has 4. So let's say if it's the script condition, if the count star is greater than 3. So as soon as I have 4 alarms, it will combine them together into one correlated alarm. So let's apply that. The first IRD 2 and 3 don't have 4 alarms yet. So you can see IRD 2 only has 1 alarm. IRD 3 has 2 alarms, and IRD 1 has 4. So this one is grouping together. So if I would remove this one alarm again, now it's again ungrouped, because now they have only 3 alarms on IRD 1. And as soon as I have 4 alarms, it will group that together. You could do the same thing, and that's a little bit the example I gave with the remote site. If you have like 3 satellite receivers here in London, and if all 3 go into alarm, and you take those receive level alarms, the critical alarms on the receive level, for instance, and if you say, if I have for the view London, if I have at least 3 of them, all of them are going into alarm, yeah, then this is not a coincidence anymore. This is not a device problem anymore. This must be probably environmental, or the rain fade happening there. So I will group them together and warn the operator, like, yeah, probably there's a rain fade happening in London. So that's an example where you take from a certain view all the receive levels, and you say, if I reach 3 of them, then I go for a rain fade grouping. So in this case, it's only on the elements I do a grouping starting from 3. Let's maybe remove that again so that I have again a grouping on all 3 London devices, a group. Okay. So that's the example of adding a rule condition. So you have 2 rule conditions. You can just look what is in the bucket. For instance, my LMB is in there. That was with a filter condition, or with a script condition, I can go for like a count, for instance. So I did the 3 steps here. I filtered. I took, for instance, only Philips devices in there in a certain view, or Philips alarms into a certain view. And then I grouped them into buckets per element. So each element has its own bucket. And then I said within the bucket, if there's an LMB alarm, group it. Or in the second demo, I said if there are at least 4 alarms in there, then group it. Those were the 2 rule conditions that I added to keep an additional condition, or to add an additional condition onto that group or onto that bucket. Okay. Now we also have that trigger mechanism that is now coming up in my UI. And as you can see in my UI, let's go back on my DataMiner Cube here. So I have the filter section, I have the grouping section, and I have the rule condition section. So I just saw all 3 of them, and I did some demos with it. Now I will see that I have this section where I can define a little bit the trigger mechanism. By default, it does it immediately. That's indeed what we saw. Whenever I generate the alarm, or whenever it's 4 alarms, or whatever my conditions were, immediately it executes and generates that grouping alarm. So that's the default, and that's the first case here, the immediate evaluation. So basically the event occurs, that's the green arrow, and the red arrow is on top of it, so it's immediately happening. It's one and the same arrow, so you don't even see the green one. So whenever it happens, this is in time. Each time an alarm happens, the trigger will happen. There's also an interesting one, the persistent event. Only do it when the condition is there for a number of seconds. So if it pops up and it's only there for 5 seconds, it doesn't happen and it doesn't do anything. But if it's there and it's longer than 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, then it will execute something. So let's play around with that one. So if we change it from immediately to something like persistent and say that needs to be in there for 10 seconds, and if we apply that, now let's go back to my London IRD 3 maybe, because I think this one doesn't have that many alarms, and let's remove the alarms. So London IRD 3 is gone again. So let me trigger a new problem on the London IRD 3. So as soon as I have the alarm is there, but it takes 10 seconds. So if the alarm would disappear again, and if it's not there, nothing happens. Nothing really worried me or took action. But only if it would be there for like a longer period of time, in my case 10 seconds, it will do the correlation triggering. Now, in this case, we only pick up on the alarm and generate basically the same alarm. You could say it's also a critical alarm. But you could, for instance, say, well, if I have a warning alarm on like, let's say a UPS, for instance, it's no problem that the alarm happens because the UPS is there for a reason and it does its job. But if the alarm remains there for a longer period of time, then I can say that I maybe start to worry that nobody is taking action, or this becomes a more concerning situation. So you can take one of those existing alarms and say, if this warning remains in my system for like, let's say 15 minutes, then I want to escalate it. So you can escalate an alarm as well, generate, for instance, then a critical alarm to make sure that it gets the necessary attention. So that's how you can also pick up and say, like, if an alarm happens too long, it's becoming a bad situation. If it's only for a short period of time, I'm not worried too much. And there's also the possibility to say that if it happens too often in a short period of time, so if it occurs like 10 times in 1 minute, then I want to do something. Typical example, for instance, is it's no problem if now and then an error is being detected on the signal. It can happen that now and then a small error is there. But if suddenly it starts to happen too often, and I have like the error happening like 10 times in a minute, then I start worrying and I say like, I want to pick up on that, and I want to now generate a correlated alarm that says like, maybe dear operator, you need to take a look at this because it starts to become a little bit worrying if it happens too often. So that's the sliding window with the number of times it can happen in a period of time. There are some more options to that. You can play around with those and read up on that in docs as well. So that's the basic mechanism. I'm not going to do it with the sliding window. So you can go for a sliding window and just say like, yeah, if it happens 10 times in 1 minute, for instance, and then you generate 10 alarms. But I'm not going to generate 10 alarms now. I'm just going to go back for the immediate evaluation, which is the default. I do something, I immediately see it. That's better for demo purposes. Okay, so now let's take a look at the actions. So I already added the action in there, which is the new alarm. There are some more actions possible as well. So let's take a look at the last section at the bottom where I can define those actions. In my example, I quickly added a new alarm and I left everything by default. So let's take a look at that. So the new alarm will generate a new alarm, and it will also generate it typically on the alarm that originally generated the base alarm, or like the triggering alarms. So if an alarm happens on London IRD 1, then it will also generate the correlated alarm on London IRD 1. Same for the parameter. We need a parameter as well. The first alarm was generated on audio output level, so it took that parameter as the base. You could hard code this to an element if you want, but it's by default taking the base alarm as the source of information, you could say, to decide which element and which parameter needs to be linked to this alarm. The value, we specified something ourselves, so there is a possibility in that value to that is here defined here. Between square brackets, you can do something like the average value is average of field value. So it's possible if you have, like in that receiver example, we have a remote site and there's a rain fade. You can take for the 5 alarms, for instance, that are happening, you can take the receive level of all 5 alarms, take the average of that, so the average of all those 5 alarms, and use that in here. So then you can say, like, a possible rain fade is happening, the average receive level on that remote site is X. So then you type average value is, and instead of X, you say between square brackets this formula. But then you need to enable this checkbox, and then it will evaluate your value to parse any of the formulas you can add. You can have more information in docs if you want. Special circumstances, you could say, or more advanced. And of course, severity, important one as well. This is just copying over the severity from the base alarm, but maybe if it's warning alarms that you're picking up, and if you say that the warning alarm remains there for too long, then maybe you want to hard code it to a critical one, or the lowest or the highest severity of source alarms is also possible. So here it's just taking it from the base alarms. Auto clear, this means whenever the conditions are no longer there, it will also automatically disappear. If I disable this option and if I apply that, and if I now, for instance, remove my alarm from IRD 3, yeah, it is already maybe having some old alarms there. So if I have my situation back to normal, because I disabled the auto clear, once a correlated alarm is generated, it will never clear again. It doesn't automatically clear. So even if my London IRD is back normal, it remains there as an alarm, and it remains there like, oh, this happened, it's there, and I can verify, oh, indeed, I can see the IRD audio output level is now 6, but it was 15 before, so it kind of like remains sticky there, and then I can clear the alarm, and then it's gone. So apparently I already have 2 of them, so I can clear the 3. So now this is back normal, this London IRD 3, because the correlated alarm is also gone. So the correlated alarm remains sticky if you don't enable this auto clear there, so be careful. By default it is auto clear, so that is doing an automatic clear. Okay, include name, that's just here in the between brackets, it's saying training BERT2, that's the name of your correlation rule. If you have many correlation rules that you know which one is causing which alarms, that's more for tracking purposes, that this is by default in there. Update base alarms and route time, you can play around with those, and that's more advanced. So we can add some more actions like escalating the existing event, acknowledging the base alarms, running an automation script. Very important one. So we saw automation before. So here you can run an automation script to immediately try to fix the problem. So you can say, if I detect a problem on my, or if my London IRD 1 is going into a critical alarm, I detect this, I automatically react by running an automation script, which will copy the settings from this IRD to a backup one and reroute the signal all automatically. So you can do some kind of redundancy switching. Note, in this case, you could potentially use a redundancy group. We didn't cover redundancy groups. You can look up more information in our docs on the redundancy groups. But here you can also detect problems in a main path and then trigger the activation of a backup path in an automation script. So I'm not going to run an automation script here. It's just an example. And if you would not need to run a full script, you could also do a single set of a parameter. And for instance, say like, yeah, I want to change the audio output level back to 6, for instance, and try to automatically fix by just doing a single set on there. That's also possible from here. And sending an email or a text message. An email is also a popular one. So you can say, yeah, whenever we detect these kind of circumstances, in meantime, also send me an email so that I can have immediately some notification on that. So basically, this allows you also here to include reports to send reports or to send notifications, not just when something is happening on a scheduled basis, but also when certain conditions are being met in my system. So whenever, for instance, the London side goes into alarm and all of the elements are going into alarm and I have a possible rain fade, then I want to maybe send out an email with a report or something like that. So that's the email you can also go for. Okay, so that was the correlation rule that we created. So we went for a filter, we grouped it by alarm, by elements, and then we also added a condition there, played a little bit with the mechanism, and typically we went for generating alarms, which is the most easy one to immediately see the effects. There is also in the top a little bit of advanced options underneath your name. So if I go back to the top and I say show details underneath your name, well, you can add a description. There are two checkboxes there. By default, it will only listen to alarms. You can also accept information events. If you would like to trigger on information events, you need to specifically enable this, because by default they are not taken into account, just to reduce the load on your rule. And the first one here, accept correlated alarms or correlation alarms. Be careful when accepting correlation alarms, and the reason is because you can generate correlated alarms. If you trigger on correlation alarms, you can basically trigger on yourself. So because you detect a critical problem, for instance, on your Philips device, and you generate a critical alarm on your Philips device, and then your rule will trigger again. Oh, we have again a critical alarm, and you basically make a loop. So be careful when accepting correlation alarms that you're not triggering upon your own created alarms in the same rule. By default, a correlation rule runs on a DataMiner agent and listens to those alarms. You can also correlate across DataMiner agents in the cluster, but then you need to choose also which agent will be the hosting one and which will be doing the correlation actions there. So there you need to choose your hosting agent then. Okay, so those are a couple of the advanced options I also wanted to mention. Okay, so the correlation alarm, we basically already took a look at that. So we had some alarms that are individual on elements. We can say whenever something more happens or my LMB1 supply, the input goes down, then I want to group things together so that it's more human readable, you could say, for the operator to say like, okay, oh, this situation is happening, and it's condensing things together in more single grouped alarms in my correlation, in my alarm console. Okay, so the exercise is a little bit similar as we have already done, so you can play around with that. So it's triggering on certain things we have done already, but instead of the actions generating an alarm, here it's sending out an email. So you can also play around with that, and the email can also contain placeholders, the square bracket things. You can also play around with those in there, and you have the example here. So feel free to also do this exercise. All right, so and with this correlation module, where we were able to take a look at certain conditions happening in your system and automatically reacting on that by making it more human readable for the operator and condensing things and grouping it together into correlated alarms, or automatically trying to notify somebody, or even fixing the problem by running an automation script. So with this module, our journey came to an end here. So we went all the way from fundamentals to the configuration level 1 and 2 up to here the sysadmin. It was a long journey. It was a lot of information, but at many modules it's only a starting point. So I hope you have now a good foundation to keep on exploring the different possibilities in those different modules, using docs and using some more videos and katas and all the things we have available on Dojo, the community website, to further learn and build upon that. And there are even modules we didn't even cover. So there is still lots more to explore and to learn. I hope I gave you a good foundation here. I really enjoyed making these videos for you. I hope you enjoyed consuming them as well. And I hope not to see you in the next one, but in the next occasion, and maybe in real life, you never know. So take care and see you in the next occasion. Bye.